All right. Hey guys. So if you're watching this, this is basically a tutorial that I'm putting together for a problem that we had working with a lab with some scanned impressions for implants, for custom abutment and implant crowns. A doctor in our practice sent some scans over, and they, for whatever reason, the company that is making our custom abutments is unable to send printed models. And so the workaround the lab was using is basically to just create a traditional crown and bridge die model, 3D print it. That way they can check contacts, things like that on the models before sending us things back. But they were having a tough time with the scans that were sent back from the people who were making the custom abutments for us, where they just couldn't get it to print. They were having problems using 3Shape to get it to print out there. So we were able to find a workaround for that using Meshmixer, which is a free software. There's probably easier ways to do this, but with Meshmixer being free, it kind of covers your bases if you're using just about anything. So I'm gonna bring some scans in here just to show you what we're working with. There's two ways to do this with Meshmixer. If you're not familiar with Meshmixer, this is probably not the best place to start. There's tons of videos out on YouTube. Dr. Corey Glenn, Dr. Baron Grutter. Hopefully I'm saying his last name correctly, but both of those guys, awesome Meshmixer tutorials available. At this point, you could probably learn just about anything you want to by watching their stuff. So if you're not familiar, definitely recommend checking them out. But for this is more problem focused. I'm going to show you how we kind of found a workaround for this problem that we had. So I'm going to drag these scans in here. In a second, they're going to pop up here. And right off the bat, you can kind of see some areas that we're having problems with. So just a quick tip, if you're using Meshmixer and you have what most people have as a default and have a printer bed here, you can actually turn that off. So I turn it back on there. I find that this gets in my way a lot. If you go to View, Show Printer Bed, and just uncheck that, it'll go away for you. But I find that's a little bit easier to work with. So right off the bat, just looking at this, I have a feeling that what is causing their problems is one of two things. It's either these little islands out here. There's a couple there. There's one up here on the corner there. Or as we spin around here, sorry if I'm disorienting anybody, right in here, you can kind of see this mesh is folded in on itself. Probably where we had a Fresnel attachment and the scans were overlapping there. But those are common things that these model building softwares will run into problems with, where they don't really know how to solve this problem. Okay, so I'm going to show you a couple things here as to how we would solve that. Because we have everything in Meshmixer, I'll also show you how we were able to connect these custom abutments to the model in a way where they can print it as one solid thing. What they were doing is using the model's algorithm to basically close this gap for them. But instead of doing that, we're going to come up with a little bit better of a way. It's probably a little bit more predictable. So first thing I'm going to do is move these models to where they're not kind of poking up through the base there. I think it's a little bit hard to navigate. And so what I'm going to do is highlight both of these in the object browser. That way they're both selected. And we're going to hit T for transform. You can also select it up here in the upper left. We'll hit T, and it's going to bring up this transform. So very important with this part, you can touch this little triangle here. You can touch the arrows. Don't touch these little boxes. It's especially important for scans or this box in the middle, because if you're using this to check the fit of your crowns, whether it be interproximal contacts, glue contacts, you will mess something up. So like, let's say I grab this and I drag it way out. Okay, now that scan's super distorted. You can't drag that back and get it perfect by hand. If I hit Control Z, super easy way to fix that. That's your save your button, your undo button there. But be very careful with those, because you don't want to hit it just a little bit by accident and distort your scans. So I'm going to move these up. We're going to turn these over. That way it's a little bit easier to work with. And because I'm moving both of these, and eventually I'm going to export this bottom model, you want to make sure that once you move them, you keep them together. But also, when you go to export them, you want to export them together and bring these versions of the models into your model building software, because each STL has a coordinate to it. And the reason these came in articulation like this is because the coordinates are saved. You can kind of see those contacts there. If I just export this lower one and I try to use it with the original one, you're not going to have this relationship here where you could put like a little articulating hinge on it and have those contacts be accurate. So just make sure if you are going to move those to make it a little bit easier to work with, you export both of them at the end. Okay, and we'll show that at the very end here. So I'm going to hide our upper model. First thing I'm going to do is get rid of those areas that we looked at in the beginning where we could see we have some islands hanging out here. We got that little fold there. So the easiest way to get rid of these islands is going to be to select everything and delete everything that's not what we want to keep. It sounds a little unconventional. You could use the select tool, kind of go down here, circle that, and then use the edit discard hotkey for that is X, and that will get rid of that. I'm going to undo that. I'll show you a better way just to kind of cover your bases, because you can see if I'm looking up here at this scan, I don't really see those down there at the bottom. I'll see this one over here, and yeah, I might pick up on that, but I would bet the reason that our lab was not able to get this to print is something in the model building software couldn't figure out that that wasn't supposed to be there. So what we're going to do is take our select tool, doesn't matter what size, and I'm going to double click on the scan. Doesn't highlight the abutments because they're technically not connected. There's a space in between both. I'll double click each abutment. So I now have everything that I want to keep selected. Then I'm going to go to modify invert. So basically I've just selected everything that wasn't just selected. You can kind of see that, see how that little island's orange there. And then I'll hit X, or our discard button. So now I've taken care of all of the islands, even the ones that I couldn't see. And that should work out a little bit better. The second thing I'm going to do while I'm in the select tool is come into this area, especially because this fold is not in something that we necessarily need to keep. I'm going to go ahead and come through the vestibule and just get rid of that. And that should solve the majority of the problems you have. Now, if you want to remesh this boundary, make it look a little bit prettier, you're free to do that. It's probably not going to affect how this is processed in a model building software when you go to put the base on it, but you can do that. It's not going to hurt anything. Holes in the mesh like this right here, you probably don't need to worry about right now. Most softwares will fill that. We can actually fill that at the very end here when we go to check our model for integrity. So the next thing I want to show you, most of the time this is going to get you where you need to go as far as printing a model. You can always save this as an STL, export it, bring it into 3Shape or Exocad or whatever you're using to build your models, and see if you can get it to go. If you're just using this for contacts and you're not really trying to get a soft tissue model, I would take it one step further just to make your life a little bit easier and go ahead and make this one STL. And that way it's easier to process. You don't have to worry about the gap filling being accurate, and you know that software is not going to alter your abutments. And so I'll show you what I found to be probably the easiest way to do that. First thing I'm going to do, just to make sure I don't alter these abutments in any way while I'm doing that, is I'm going to double click each one individually. Then I'm going to go to edit and separate. The hotkey for that is Y. And that's going to create these abutments as a separate part. I'm going to rename this abutments. And then that way I can turn these on and off if I need to. What we're going to do in order to join these two things is modify the lower scan itself to basically create what would be almost like a ditched die or a ditched second pour if you were doing a crown model or something like that. You can take it a step further in Meshmixer. You can make dies, you can make soft tissue models. It's just going to be a lot easier and more predictable in whatever CAD software that you normally use. This is just to kind of fix this very specific scenario where we have custom abutments, but we don't have digital analogs or a soft tissue model or something where we're just trying to get something we can print. For any doctors watching this, really the only situation that you would specifically run into is probably going to be if you're trying to print models to check things and you get an STL back from like Atlantis or a true abutment where they aren't unable to send you like a digital analog that you could just snap in there. So this is a way you could do that. I know for most docs doing those cases, you're probably not checking them. You're just designing them, milling them, and then you'll try it in the same day. And you can always tweak that if you need to. But this is a way to kind of solve that problem. So what I'm going to do is highlight my lower scan here. And we want to modify this in a way where I have a way to connect these two things. And so you can see the spacing around here is really tight. Even if I was able to get this connected to the bottom of that, there's no way you're going to be able to accurately try a crown on this abutment without having the narrowest emergence profile on planet Earth. And so because we're not using this as a soft tissue model, we just want to check and make sure our contacts are okay. What I'm going to do is create a little bit of space first and foremost. And I'm going to do that by just coming down here. You can kind of see that blue line. I made my spot size for my select tool super, super small. We're going to double click that. And sometimes it takes a second. There we go. If you double click on outside, just outside it, it'll select the whole model. Just clear selection and try again. But this is what I'm looking for. I want that kind of narrow orange line following that rough mesh. I don't want it to be rough for what we're doing here because a lot of these functions depend on kind of a nice smooth surface to work with. If you leave it rough, the algorithms, they don't really like it that much. And so I'm going to make this a little bit bigger first and foremost. So I'll go to modify and I'll go to expand ring. The hotkey for that is a greater than symbol. So I'll click it once here. I've expanded it once. I want that a little bit bigger, so I'll expand it twice. And then even though I've got a larger area, it's still rough. And so we'll go to modify and smooth boundary. Hotkey for that is B. And so you can kind of see the area that it's going to affect is way, way out there, but that is the projected kind of nice smooth line. That's what we want. So I'll hit accept on that. So now that I have a smooth boundary, it's still tight up against this abutment where seating a crown is going to be tough. So I'm going to use the discard function. Hotkey for that is X. That way I've gained some space, and then we'll basically just do the same thing. We'll double click that. We're going to expand that ring a couple times, greater than symbol 1, 2, and then we'll smooth our boundary again. Okay. So now I've got space between the abutment and this kind of simulated tissue here to where I could probably get a crown in there to try it in and check the contacts. If you find that let's say you know that this crown coming out of here, this deeper area has got to kind of come up here and touch this contact. If you're worried that this is going to get in the way, you can always trim it outside the mouth, or you can just make that ring bigger. But for what we're doing here, we want this area selected here. Instead of discarding this, we're actually going to use a different tool, and we're going to use extrude. Seems kind of counterintuitive. We definitely don't want it to go up like it's trying to do there. What we're going to do is drag this down, maybe about 1.5 millimeters, a little bit more. I just want to make sure that the level that we're dragging it down to, you can kind of see how it's dropped down there, is past the height of contour on our abutment here. If you don't get it right the first time, that's okay. You can always undo your way back through these tools. So let's say I hit accept and I don't like that. I can hit Control Z and it'll bring me back into this tool. And I can always change it there. But I want to leave it just like that just to see what happens. If you mess up, you click off of this or you clear the selection, that's okay. You can always double click this face group again. But with this selected here, I'm going to hit F for fill or erase and fill. And you can get to all those things through, I'll hit Control Z here. You can get to those three things through this edit model. They're all in the list here if you ever forget what the hotkey is. But erase and fill is the one we want to use. And you can already see it's got this nice kind of smooth area underneath there where it took that smooth boundary and it just created a little bowl there. The most important part for this is, number one, I can see the margins of my abutment, but I can also see that this abutment is protruding down here through this, the mesh of our intraoral scan. And the reason that's important is it creates a watertight model when you take it through the model editor or whatever you use in order to create a printable model. If you don't do that and you leave this open, chances are it's going to have a hard time solving that hole that you've left for the same reason that we had to go in and fix it the first time. And so you want to make sure that that's the way. Like we said earlier, if you find that it's not in the right place, you can always hit undo until you get back to that offset tool, drop it up or down. You can also kind of cheat it a little bit. You can kind of see in the erase and fill tool, you can change this bulge to make it go down or up, whatever you find you need. It's really not going to affect anything, but that'll help you kind of cheat it a little bit. So this looks pretty good. I would go ahead and accept this. Because our abutment is still a separate model, I can now go to my sculpt tool and I can use bubble smooth, make that a little bit bigger now that we're not trying to hit that little line. And I can just round off these kind of sharp edges, make sure that there's nothing that's going to run the risk of hanging up our crown when we're trying to check those contacts on these printed models. But because I don't have this abutment as part of the model, I can't alter it on accident. That's the important part. Now, there are a whole bunch of different tools to fix things like this. Like if you're looking at that and you're lab tech, you're probably thinking, okay, yeah, that's probably going to be in my way. You can go into your sculpt tools and we can use move, for example. We can just grab that, move it out of the way, and then you can always smooth that afterwards. Just kind of smooth things up, and that'll probably work a little bit better. There's a number of different things. The inflate tool, so right here you can use that as well. For any tool, it kind of has an inverse action. So if I hit Control instead of inflating, it's kind of bringing that in. You're seeing the problem that creates there, where in these sharp lines, a lot of times it'll open the mesh up. You can smooth that back, or it'll probably be fine, or I'll show you a different way that we can fix it later. But those are some tools you can use to fix those areas. So before we move on, I'll go ahead and we'll blaze through the second one in the exact same way. I'll talk through the hotkeys as I do it. We'll double click our line there. We're going to expand that ring twice, greater than, hit B, smooth the boundary. Okay. We'll hit X to discard that. And then we're going to go back, double click it again. We'll greater than, hit B. This will happen sometimes where you can kind of see we've got, instead of that nice orange, we've got red. And so what's happened is we're probably trying to do a little bit too much at one time. If that happens, I'd probably just hit undo to where you're back to your 1 expansion. You can smooth that. So that looks pretty good. You can either leave it just like that. In this case, I think that'll work just fine. Or you can click off of this selection, reselect it, and then it'll probably let you do that. In this case, I don't really think we need to expand that anymore. So we'll leave it the way it is. But just know that that's something that may happen. Anytime you try to do one of these functions and something turns red, usually it means that you're either trying to do too much, or sometimes the mesh will be too rough, or you'll have an area that's just going to have problems for that tool to compute. So it's definitely something to look out for. Usually there's a way around it. That's kind of getting into more of Meshmixer basics. And so there's YouTube videos all over the place as to kind of what to do if that thing, that specific thing happens to you. But we're going to continue on here. We're using that negative offset just to drop that down. That's probably a little bit too aggressive, so we'll bring it up a little bit. And we'll hit accept. I've still got that face group selected there. We'll hit F for erase and fill. Double check. We do indeed have that covered. Let's say we were worried about this little area here. We could use our bulge. We'll just use that negative bulge to bring it up a little bit and accept. Okay. So now we have the same thing. We've got our abutment there. See all the margins, past the head contour, and we've created some space where we can check those contacts. I'm going to do the same thing we did before, where we'll use our sculpt tool. We'll go back to our bubble smooth. That's a personal favorite of mine. And we'll just go around some of these sharp edges, just kind of melt those edges away. But the abutment's not selected, so I'm not really worried about altering that. Come around here. Awesome. Okay, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on that. Just like before, if you find like little areas that are going to get in your way, you can always move those out of the way or adjust them. Sometimes you may even find it's easier to adjust it by hand. But for this, we've pretty much achieved what we set out to do. Then the last part is to bring those abutments back into this this lower model, so that way it's one STL file. What I would do, just to make your life a little bit easier, having these as open holes is probably going to be just fine. But I like to close things like that, just to give that model editor a little bit better of a time when you're trying to put a base on this or create dies. There's a pretty easy way to do that. Just for the sake of showing things, I'm actually going to take these abutments and we're going to duplicate those. So now I have two. We'll call this, we'll just leave it as copy. These abutments we're going to go ahead and close, just we talked about, but that way I have a separate model to show you something different you can do with them. So for this, because that's rough, you could probably just hit F and erase and fill that. That would work fine, but you can kind of see areas where that's real jagged. I don't really like the way that looks. And so I'm going to hit undo and we'll smooth that first with that boundary tool. And we'll hit OK and then F for fill and then accept. And you're seeing that gray is just this extra copy of abutments. I'll turn that off so you can see on this one. We're going to go back to our select tool. I'll do the exact same thing on this abutment here. B for smooth boundary, F for erase and fill. Okay, so now we have those closed. They're not necessarily solid models. There is a space in here. So for example, if we really wanted to see, I could go to edit and plane cut. And you can kind of see if I hit no fill here, you can see down into those. So they're not solid, but they are watertight. And that's what's really important for printing. Not only are they watertight, but they also intersect with that mesh to where you'll be able to put a base on it, and you shouldn't have any problems. So I'm going to hit cancel on that. We don't really want to plane cut that. Now that we have the abutments sealed at the bottom and they're intersecting with that mesh, we'll highlight both the abutments and that lower scan just by hitting Control and clicking that on the object browser, and then we'll hit combine. And so now we've got our abutments with a little tissue space kind of cut out there, so that way you can see your crowns, but they're also connected down here. Okay, now this is ready to go. Just remember, when you go to export this, make sure you export both this and the upper. You just go to File, Export, and then you could export it as an STL. Even though they're both STL files, they do have coordinates to them. So if you want to maintain that that relationship, the occlusal relationship, so that way you can put a little articulating hinge on it, you're definitely going to want to export them together. So that's important. Not necessarily together as the same STL, but together as in the same folder. That way you can import them as a brand new case. And the only reason you have to do that is because you've changed the orientation as far as the location in Meshmixer. So I'm going to back out of that. For the problem that we were working with lab, this is just fine. This should work out. You could bring that into whatever software you want. Should do just fine. I'll show you a second thing that you can do. Let's say if you want to have a way to stain those crowns or something, or you wanted to have like a little dye pen. Let's say, for example, you got like a translucent crown material, and you wanted to kind of, let's say you wanted to anodize your abutment and you want to see what that looked like, but you want to stain it and not get any of that stain on your abutment, for example. A number of different reasons you'd want to do that or not do that, but there's a way where you can create almost like little dye pens here. The only difference is we won't have like a traditional dye model, we won't have that lower model to seat down into to mimic the position. But if you wanted to create like almost like an analog for the crown to sit on, you could do that. We'll do that similar to how we close this. We'll hit B to smooth that boundary. We'll accept it, creates a much more ideal surface there. And then we'll hit F for erase and fill, but in this time we're going to go to flat minimal for the fill, or we'll even do flat remesh. It's a little bit better. So you can kind of create that flat surface. We'll hit accept. And with that still selected, we'll go to edit and extrude. And so now I can take this and I can bring it way on down here to where I could hold that in my hand, seat the crown on there. It'd be a whole lot easier for me to stain that or do whatever I need to do and not worry about getting something on the abutments or having to deal with like hemostats or something like that. So that's just an extra thing you can do. You can take this and extend it as long as you want to, and these should print with the same accuracy. It's not really designed to do like a pin die or something like that you use for a crown and bridge model. You can do that in Meshmixer, but it's going to be a whole lot easier than what you would normally use. So, but that's a couple ways to kind of solve problems with scans. I would bet that for what we were working with there, that first part was probably just fine. One last thing here as we look at these, sometimes you'll have areas like this that most of the time will be just fine. The software will close that up, the software you use to build the base on your model. Sometimes you'll run into issues with that. And so there's a quick and easy way to fix that in Meshmixer. What we'll use is the inspector tool, and you'll see we've got two areas of blue. It's very important that you don't hit this one. What that is pointing to is the open boundary at the bottom of this mesh. And that's a problem because if you click that, you're going to be sitting around for a while or you're going to lose all the work you just did. There's really no way that this is going to accurately fill in the bottom of this because it doesn't have a smooth enough surface. We got a lot of irregularities, and so it's going to spend a lot of time thinking about that. It's probably going to fail or crash, and so stay away from that one. This one, on the other hand, where it's just that circle, you can hit this. It'll use your default hole fill mode up here, which in this case is flat fill. You can pick whichever one you want, smooth, for example, and you just click that, and it'll fill it in for you, and that is done. And you kind of saw, I'll show you again here in Inspector, it has an auto repair all. The only time you're going to want to use that is after you've put bases on your models where the only possible open spaces are areas where there's errors in the mesh. And open manifold scans like this, you want to stay away from that. So I think I was probably as thorough as I could be without putting people to sleep with this. If anyone has any questions, I know for the people who reach out to me or that I was working with, they all have my contact information. I will probably post this to YouTube just so it's easier to share. If you have any questions, drop a comment in the comments down there, and I'll ask or I'll answer them as best I can. There's a lot of things you can do with Meshmixer. Most of the people who will be dealing with the problem like this probably have a software that's better suited for that. But if you have any issues, let me know. I'll help you out as best I can. Thanks for watching, guys.